the Iowa, is it a primary or is it a caucus for the Republicans? It's caucus. And that's going to be essentially, it's not going to be quite nail in the coffin time because there is a desperate attempt to make it seem like Nikki Haley has some type of campaign momentum. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it has to do with her being VP. That the Republican establishment desperately wants someone there to, at least, essentially spy on Donald Trump. Honestly, I think that's a big part of it. Big babysitter. Let's just look into some of this polling and then we'll get to some of the Nikki. Well, let's get to this Nikki Haley thing. Here's Nikki Haley. She had a tough time over the break. Trying to sort of thread this needle between how do I appeal to 95% of the Republican voters who are all bat crap crazy, right? But also sound like I'm not a lunatic to the establishment media because that is my entire brand proposition value or whatever it is, core brand proposition. So here she is. She is at a town hall in Berlin, New Hampshire. She expects not to win Iowa and we're only talking about Ron DeSantis here, but really New Hampshire is where she really wants to, I think, make her stand.
Open primaries, more moderate state.
Exactly. And but here she is trying to not be a Republican lunatic.
Please, what was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically...
How is that not the easiest question in the world?
That's the amazing thing that she actually comes right out and says, I'm terribly nervous about answering this question.
Exactly. And you can hear her pause and her voice shake. That's the thing that made me laugh about this, but you can start over.
She was a diplomat to the UN, and this is a hard question. Can you please explain the reason we got into a civil war 160 years ago? Is it really that sensitive?
Can you explain what color grass is and what color the sky is?
Well, I mean, that's trickier really because you need to tell me what month it is. Because if you're in the Northeast and it's like, say, August, it's brown.
I guess you're right. That's a trickier question.
It is a trickier question, but all right, go ahead.
Please, what was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do.
To do what?
What do you think the cause of the Civil War was? I'm sorry?
I'm not being president. I want to see your view on the cause of the Civil War.
I mean, I think it always comes down to the role of government. We need to have capitalism. We need to have economic freedom. We need to make sure that we do all things so that individuals have the liberties so that they can have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to do or be anything they want to be without government getting in the way.
In the year 2023, it's astonishing to me that you answer that question without mentioning the word slavery.
What do you want me to say about slavery? Next question.
He says you answered my question.
Okay, so he says it's amazing to me that in the year 2023, and we cut out part of her answer, right? I mean, that's a clip of her answer. It shortened it. I don't know how long it shortened it, but I mean, does it matter? How do you get through that question and have the guy say, it's amazing to me in 2023 that you can't say that the Civil War was about slavery? She didn't even put it down on the list. Never mind the top of the list. She didn't even put it on the list. And she's like, what do you want me to say about slavery?
It is amazing because one, in the sequencing of the primaries, right? She thinks her best shot is in New Hampshire. But in New Hampshire, that's not going to necessarily fly with like the big kind of independent coalition. I mean, I remember covering the primary before COVID hit in 2020, and I went to a Biden event, and there were a lot of moderate Republicans there just checking him out to speak, because it's just a different kind of political environment in New Hampshire for this primary process. And so that guy's probably someone who thinks of himself as an independent, or maybe somebody who might consider somebody else. And it's a northern state. They're not going to have the same reaction there. So she was caught in a bind between what we always talk about, the Republican base that really drives the engine of things, and the practical realities of her candidacy and how she can get any kind of toehold in, being the number 2 in this race. So, it was funny.
On Wednesday, she is in, I've been corrected, it's Berlin, New Hampshire.
Sorry.
And now, on Thursday of last week, she's in North Conway, New Hampshire, and she is trying to dig herself out of a little bit of a hole. Now, of course, here she's at a place where they have books, so she's got to be extra careful about what she says about major historical events. Here we go.
Last night I was asked about the Civil War and what I think of the Civil War, what was the cause of the Civil War. Of course the Civil War was about slavery. We know that. That's unquestioned, always the case. We know the Civil War was about slavery. But it was also more than that. It was about the freedoms of every individual. It was about the role of government. For 80 years, America had the decision and the moral question of whether slavery was a good thing and whether government, economically, culturally, any other reasons, had a role to play in that. By the grace of God, we did the right thing and slavery is no more. But the lessons of what the bigger issue with the Civil War are is that let's not forget what came out of that, which is government's role, individual liberties, freedom for every single person, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to do and be anything you want to be without anyone or government getting in your way. That should be the goal of what we always try and take away from them.
Okay. This is astonishing. So what happens is somebody says, Nikki, it looks bad that you didn't even mention slavery as a cause of the war. Not the top cause, not the last cause, not the middle cause, none of the cause. So go out there and try and fashion something. And so she goes out there and she says, of course, slavery was such a part of the Civil War that I didn't even need to include it in my answer before.
It's actually boring to mention it.
It's so obviously, and the thing is, they know it's out there. So this corrective is for the people who aren't going to follow up on this stuff anyways. But the amazing thing about this is that, no, the Second Amendment did not come out of the wake of the Civil War. That actually didn't. Neither did the First Amendment.
Right.
Those existed prior to the Civil War. What came out of the Civil War were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that were explicitly about a more activist government role, not less.
Yeah.
Explicitly about actually race-based solutions to changing the dynamic in the country. It was specifically about more aggressive involvement by the government in establishing things like public schools, et cetera, et cetera. And the amazing thing about this is it was Republicans who did it. She could have touted in the fact that it was Republicans who did it.
Right.
And what is the government's role in securing individual rights? It's, should they fight a war against the slave-owning class that basically started the conflict to secure its own freedoms, as you say?
Yeah.
But it's funny, you look at DeSantis is yikes. It looks like Nikki Haley has some problems with American history. Not that difficult to identify identify and acknowledge the role slavery played in the Civil War. Donald Trump also saying, Nikki, the answer is slavery, period. It's very funny to watch these guys who are who basically have the neo-Confederate or crypto-Confederate vote in hand also preen about that.
Hey, DeSantis like instituted a curriculum in Florida that basically said what her first answer was. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, how many times have you heard Donald Trump talk about like the 1776 project versus the evil 1619 project or whatever? I like when she says it's primarily about the freedom of the individuals. Yeah, I mean, like mostly about the freedom of black people. Like from chattel slavery, but then she tries
as compared to the freedom of slave owners.
It's of the ability for slave owners to own those people. So those things are a little bit in contradiction when we're talking about freedoms. It's the individual freedom for everybody. On one side, you have the individual freedom of people to not be property. On the other side, you have the individual freedom of people to make them property. And the Civil War was about that, about freedom for everybody to do what they wanted. Now, Nikki, unfortunately, those two things are a bit incompatible.
But this the reason why we show this is to show how really nuts the base of the Republican Party is. And the base, by the base, I mean like it's a bigger base, really, if you define it as people who are going to participate in the primaries, in the level of enthusiasm on the Republican side. Because to have to walk a tightrope that causes you not to mention the word slavery when you answer the question as to what was the Civil War about.
Right.
And even like all the people who say, well, slavery was a second order issue. It was about economics. She couldn't even say that. Which, of course, is total BS. But she couldn't even say the word slavery. Yeah. For fear.
It's just about ideas.
For fear of being labeled some type of like, liberal or,
bit woke.
wokist or whatever it is.